The gunshot that shattered the bottle on the fence post came from a woman's rifle, and every man in the dusty street of Redrock, Texas, turned to stare at the figure standing outside the general store in the blazing afternoon sun of July 1878. Cassandra Wells lowered her Winchester with the same casual confidence a man might tip his hat, her auburn hair catching the light like polished copper beneath the wide brim that shaded eyes the color of Texas bluebonnets. She had arrived in town 3 days prior with nothing but a worn saddlebag, her dead father's rifle, and a reputation that preceded her by 200 miles. The men whispered about her in the saloon. The daughter of Thomas Wells, the legendary scout who had mapped half of West Texas before a Comanche arrow, found his heart 5 years back. The girl who had ridden alone from San Antonio to Redrock, turning down 3 marriage proposals along the way, and leaving one particularly persistent suitor with a black eye and a lesson in manners. She was 22 years old and had the kind of beauty that made men stupid, but it was the intelligence in her eyes and the steel in her spine that made them nervous. "Miss Wells," called out Mayor Hutchins from the porch of his office, his round face glistening with sweat beneath his derby hat. "That is quite the display, but we do have ordinances about discharging firearms within town limits." Cassandra turned those blue eyes on him with an expression that suggested she had heard every possible variation of a man telling her what she could and could not do. "Mayor Hutchins, that rattlesnake was coiled not 3 feet from where your grandson was playing in the dirt. I suggest you look before you lecture." Every head swiveled to where she pointed, and sure enough, the body of a 6-foot diamondback lay in 2 pieces, its head separated clean from its body by her second shot. The one nobody had paid attention to because they had been too busy being scandalized by a woman handling a rifle. Mayor Hutchins went pale, then red, then cleared his throat in a way that suggested he was swallowing his own authority along with his pride. "I stand corrected, Miss Wells. The town thanks you." "The town can thank me by letting me be," Cassandra said, not unkindly but with the firmness of someone who had drawn her boundaries in stone. "I came here to start fresh, not to be gawked at like a carnival attraction." She turned and walked into the general store, leaving behind a street full of men who did not quite know what to make of her. All except one. Nathaniel Cole had been leaning against the post outside the telegraph office, watching the entire exchange with the kind of quiet attention that missed nothing. At 26, he had the weathered look of a man who had spent his life under an unforgiving sun, with dark hair that touched his collar and gray eyes that seemed to see straight through pretense to truth. He had worked cattle drives from Texas to Kansas, had broken horses that other men swore were unbreakable, and had earned the respect of every ranch hand and foreman from the Brazos to the Red River. He wore his gun low on his hip not because he was looking for trouble, but because trouble had a way of finding a man in this territory, and he believed in being prepared. What made Nathaniel different from the other men in that street was simple. While they saw a woman who defied their expectations and felt threatened, he saw someone who knew exactly who she was and refused to apologize for it. And instead of being unsettled, he found himself genuinely, deeply curious. He pushed off from the post and walked into the general store behind her, not following but simply continuing about his own business, which happened to include purchasing supplies for the small ranch he had recently acquired 15 miles outside of town. The ranch was modest, 200 acres with a decent water source and enough grazing land to support a small herd. He had saved for 6 years to buy it, sleeping under stars more often than roofs, eating beans and hardtack while other men spent their pay on whiskey and poker. Now it was his, and he was building something that would last. Inside the store, Cassandra was discussing flour and salt with Mr. Peterson, the proprietor, a thin man with spectacles who treated everyone with the same mild courtesy regardless of gender or station. Nathaniel gathered his own supplies, listening without appearing to listen, which was a skill he had learned young, I will need it delivered to the old Harrison place, Cassandra was saying. I have taken a lease on it. That made Nathaniel glance up. The Harrison place was a homestead that had sat empty for 2 years after old Samuel Harrison had died without heirs. It was small, maybe 40 acres, with a cabin that needed work and a well that was reliable. It was also only about 5 miles from his own property, which made them neighbors by frontier standards. "Miss Wells, I do not mean to pry," Mr. Peterson said carefully, "but that place needs considerable repair. Perhaps you have family coming to help you, brothers or cousins." "I have 2 hands and a strong back," Cassandra replied with a patience that suggested she had answered this question before. "I will manage. A woman alone out there, it is not entirely safe," Mr. Peterson continued, and Nathaniel could hear the genuine concern beneath the words. The shopkeeper was not trying to condescend, merely worried in the way any decent person might be. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Peterson, but I assure you I am quite capable. I am not afraid of hard work, and I know how to handle a rifle, as was recently demonstrated." Nathaniel finished gathering his supplies and brought them to the counter. Cassandra stepped aside to let him conduct his business, and for the first time their eyes met properly. He touched the brim of his hat in greeting, a gesture of respect between equals. "Ma'am, sir." She returned the acknowledgement with a small nod. "Nate Cole," Mr. Peterson said, tallying up Nathaniel's purchases. "This here is Miss Cassandra Wells, new to our area. Miss Wells, Nate has a place out west of town. Good man, fair dealer. If you need anything, he would be a fine neighbor to ask." Nathaniel saw the flicker of wariness cross her face, the automatic suspicion of a woman who had learned that offers of help often came with invisible strings attached. He understood it, even respected it, so he kept his tone neutral and his words simple. "The offer stands if needed, but I imagine you will do just fine on your own. That was some shooting out there. Your father taught you well." Something shifted in her expression, a slight softening around the eyes. "You knew my father, met him once about 7 years back. I was 18 and greener than spring grass. He was guiding a surveying party through rough country, and I was part of the crew hired to protect them. He taught me more about reading land and weather in 3 weeks than I had learned in my whole life up to that point. When I heard he had died, I felt the loss of it. He was a good man." The wariness faded a bit more, replaced by something that looked like cautious appreciation. "He was the best man I ever knew, thank you for saying so. Just the truth." Nathaniel paid for his supplies and tipped his hat again. "Welcome to Redrock, Miss Wells. I hope it treats you well." He left the store and loaded his supplies into his wagon, aware that he had just had the most interesting conversation he had experienced in months. Most people in Redrock were good folks, but they were familiar, predictable. Cassandra Wells was neither of those things, and he found that more intriguing than he wanted to admit. Over the next 2 weeks, Nathaniel saw Cassandra 3 more times in town. Each time she was conducting business with the same brisk efficiency, purchasing tools and materials, arranging for lumber to be delivered, speaking with the land office to finalize her lease. She was polite but distant, clearly establishing that she was not in Redrock looking for a husband or even companionship. She was there to build a life on her own terms. The town responded in mixed fashion. Some of the older women admired her grit even as they worried about propriety. Some of the men found her off-putting, too independent for their taste. Others watched her with the kind of predatory interest that made Nathaniel keep an ear to the ground. Most people, though, simply accepted her as another person trying to make a living in hard country, which was really all any of them were doing when you stripped away the ceremony of it. It was early August when Nathaniel rode past the Harrison place and saw smoke rising from the chimney. Curiosity drew him off the main trail and up the winding path to the cabin. He found Cassandra on the roof, hammering new shingles into place with the focus of someone who had watched a task being done and then figured out how to do it herself. She wore men's trousers and a work shirt, sensible clothing for the job, and her hair was tied back in a braid that hung down between her shoulder blades. She noticed him when she paused to wipe sweat from her forehead, and her expression was guarded but not unfriendly. "Mr. Cole, Miss Wells." That roof was in bad shape. Glad to see someone is finally fixing it. It leaked in 4 places. I woke up to rain dripping on my face 2 nights ago. She gestured with her hammer toward the cabin below. The well water is clean, though, and the stove still works. I have known worse situations. He believed it. There was a resilience to her that spoke of experience with hardship. "If you need help moving those lumber stacks, I could lend a hand. Heavy work." "I appreciate the offer, but I have a system involving leverage and patience. It works well enough." He nodded, accepting the boundary she had drawn. "I am sure it does. I actually stopped by to let you know that there is a social next Saturday at the church. Nothing fancy, just food and music. Good way to meet folks if you are interested, no pressure if you are not." She studied him for a long moment, and he had the distinct impression he was being measured against some internal standard that she did not share with others. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her, because she offered a small smile, the first real one he had seen from her. "I might come by." "I do not mind people, Mr. Cole. I just mind people who think they have a right to tell me how to live." "Fair distinction," Nathaniel said, returning the smile. "For what it is worth, I mind those people too. Then we have that in common." She turned back to her shingles, then paused and looked down at him again. "And Mr. Cole, you can call me Cassandra. Miss Wells makes me feel like a school teacher, and I barely survived the actual schooling I received." "Cassandra, then, and I go by Nate." "All right, Nate." "Thank you for the invitation." He rode away feeling oddly pleased with himself, though he could not pin down exactly why. Perhaps it was simply nice to talk to someone who said what they meant and meant what they said. In his experience, that was a rarer quality than it should be. Saturday arrived hot and clear, the kind of day that made a person grateful for any breath of wind. Nathaniel drove his wagon into town midday, parking near the church where tables had been set up under the shade of old oak trees. Women were arranging dishes of food, while men clustered in groups, discussing cattle prices and weather patterns. Children ran between the adults, their laughter cutting through the deeper rumble of conversation. Nathaniel was helping Pastor Reynolds set up benches when he heard the change in the ambient sound, that particular shift that happened when something unexpected entered a familiar scene. He turned and saw Cassandra arriving on horseback, a beautiful chestnut mare that moved with the kind of smooth gait that spoke of good breeding and better training. Cassandra herself wore a simple blue dress that matched her eyes, nothing fancy but clean and well-fitted. Her hair was down, falling in waves past her shoulders, and Nathaniel found himself staring along with half the town. She dismounted with easy grace and tied her horse to the rail, then walked toward the gathering with her head high and her expression pleasantly neutral. Several women immediately moved to greet her, including Mrs. Patterson, the preacher's wife, who had a gift for making people feel welcome. Nathaniel went back to his work, but kept partial attention on Cassandra as she was introduced around. She handled it well, friendly without being overly warm, answering questions about her homestead with enough detail to be polite, but not so much as to invite unwanted advice. He noticed that she particularly warmed to Sarah Chen, whose family ran the laundry and whose own experience as an outsider in a predominantly white town gave her an understanding of what it meant to be viewed as different. The afternoon progressed with food and conversation, and eventually someone brought out a fiddle. Dancing started, informal and high-spirited, couples spinning across the grass with varying degrees of skill. Nathaniel danced with Mrs. Patterson, who was 60 if she was a day, and with young Emily Dawson, who was 17 and giggly. He was taking a break and drinking lemonade when Tom Bradshaw approached Cassandra. Tom was a ranch hand for the Circle K, a decent enough fellow when he was sober but prone to thinking himself more charming than he actually was. Nathaniel watched as Tom asked Cassandra to dance, saw her polite refusal, saw Tom persist with the kind of wheedling that probably worked on some women. Cassandra's expression went from polite to cool, and when Tom reached for her hand uninvited, she stepped back sharply. "I said no thank you. Come on now, do not be unfriendly, it is just a dance." "And I am just saying no, that should be sufficient." Tom was drunk enough to be stupid. He reached for her again, and this time Cassandra caught his wrist with a speed that surprised everyone watching. She did not hurt him, just held him firm and spoke with absolute clarity. "I do not belong to you or to any man here. I am not interested in dancing with you, and I will not be persuaded or bullied or cajoled into changing my mind. Do you understand?" Tom jerked his hand back, his face flushing red with embarrassment and anger. "You are not as special as you think you are, Miss Wells. Plenty of women would be grateful for the attention. Then I suggest you dance with one of them." Tom opened his mouth to say something else, something that Nathaniel suspected would cross the line from rude to insulting, so he stepped forward and spoke with the kind of calm that carried its own warning. "Tom, Mrs. Patterson was looking for someone to help carry more lemonade from the church kitchen. I told her you would be happy to help." It was a face-saving exit, and Tom was just sober enough to recognize it. He muttered something under his breath and stalked away. Nathaniel turned to Cassandra, who was watching him with an expression he could not quite read. "I did not need rescuing," she said quietly. "I know, but I figured you did not need Tom making more of an ass of himself either. Bad for everyone involved." She considered that, then nodded slowly. "Thank you, then, for the assist, not the rescue. There is a difference. I am aware." He hesitated, then decided to take the risk. "Would you like to dance?" "And before you answer, I am asking because I would enjoy it, not because I think you need a partner or because I expect anything beyond a dance. If you say no, I will accept it and we will talk about something else instead. How is that for clear terms?" For the first time since he had met her, Cassandra laughed. It was a real laugh, bright and genuine, and it transformed her face from pretty to genuinely beautiful. "Those are extremely clear terms. Yes, Nate, I would like to dance with you." He offered his hand and she took it, and they moved into the loose circle of dancers. The fiddle was playing something quick and lively, and while neither of them were fancy dancers, they both knew the basic steps well enough to manage. What made it work was something less tangible than technique. It was the way he held her hand firmly but not possessively, the way she matched his movements without trying to lead or follow but simply moving with him. It was partnership in its simplest form, and when the song ended, they were both slightly breathless and smiling. "That was better than fixing a roof," Cassandra said. "High praise indeed." He led her off to the side where there was a bit more air and less crowd. "Can I get you something to drink? Water if there is any, lemonade if not." He returned with water and they stood together in the shade, watching the party continue around them. After a moment, Cassandra spoke quietly. "I do not mean to be difficult, you know. I just spent too many years watching my mother disappear into what my father needed her to be. She loved him, I think, but she gave up everything that made her who she was. Her art, her music, her friends. By the time she died, there was nothing left of her except the role she played. I swore I would never do that." Nathaniel absorbed that, understanding more about her now than any amount of speculation could have told him. That sounds lonely for both of them in different ways. It was. My father never understood why she became so sad. He thought providing for her and protecting her was enough. He was not a bad man, Nate. He was just a man of his time who never questioned what he had been taught a marriage should look like. And you did question it. Every day of my life since I turned 16 and realized I did not want what she had. She turned to look at him directly. That is why I react the way I do. I have had men tell me they want to take care of me, that I need a man to complete me, that I would be happier if I just accepted my place. And maybe some women do want that, but I do not. I will not be owned by any man alive, no matter how kind he is or how good his intentions are. Nathaniel took a long drink of his water, thinking about his response because this felt important in a way that went beyond casual conversation. When he spoke, he chose his words with care. "Good," he said simply. "I do not want a prize or a possession or someone who exists to make my life easier. I want an equal. Someone who has her own thoughts and dreams and who stands beside me because she chooses to, not because she has no other options. If I ever settle down with someone, I want it to be a partnership where we both bring something to the table and we both benefit from the arrangement. Anything else seems like a poor deal for at least one person involved." Cassandra stared at him, and he watched several emotions cross her face in quick succession. Surprise, skepticism, cautious hope, and then something that might have been the beginning of genuine interest. "You actually mean that?" "I do." Most men say things like that, but do not really understand what it would mean. Equal sounds nice until she has an opinion that contradicts his. Until she wants to do something he thinks is too dangerous or too improper. Until her being equal makes his life more complicated. "That is true," Nathaniel acknowledged. "I have seen it plenty. I cannot promise I would be perfect at it, Cassandra. I was raised with the same ideas as every other man here. But I can promise I am willing to try, willing to learn, and willing to be called out when I fail. That is the best I can offer." She was quiet for a long moment, and he let her think, did not try to fill the silence with more words or reassurances. Finally, she smiled, and this one reached all the way to her eyes. "That is more than most men would offer. Thank you for being honest." They spent the rest of the afternoon together, not exclusively but orbiting back to each other between other conversations and obligations. When the social began to break up in the early evening, Nathaniel walked Cassandra to her horse. "Would you like to have dinner sometime?" he asked. "There is a decent restaurant in town, or if you prefer something less formal, I make a passable stew." "I would like that, and I am curious about this stew. Tomorrow evening, I will ride to your place if you give me directions." He told her how to find his ranch, and she nodded, committing it to memory. "I will be there around sunset if that works." "That works fine." She mounted her horse with the kind of fluid motion that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle, then looked down at him with an expression that was part amusement, part challenge. "I am glad we had this conversation, Nate. It is rare to meet someone who actually listens to what I am saying instead of what they wish I was saying. I am glad we had it too. Ride safe, Cassandra." He watched her go, dust rising behind her horse in the golden light of late afternoon, and realized with a strange mix of excitement and trepidation that something significant had just begun. He had no idea where it would lead, but he found he very much wanted to find out. The next day passed with the usual work. Cattle needed tending, fences needed checking, 100 small tasks that kept a ranch functioning. But Nathaniel found his thoughts drifting to the evening ahead more often than they should, and he finally admitted to himself that he was nervous. Not because he worried about impressing Cassandra, but because he did not want to disappoint her. There was a difference. He cleaned up the cabin, which was sparse but comfortable. One large room served as kitchen and living area, with a fireplace for heat and cooking. A door led to a smaller bedroom, and everything was built solid from good lumber. He had built most of it himself over the past year, and while it was not fancy, it was honest work, and he was proud of it. The stew was a recipe he had learned on a cattle drive. Beef and vegetables simmered for hours until everything melded together into something greater than its parts. He had fresh bread from town, which he was not ashamed to admit he had not made himself, and he set the small table with the few decent plates and utensils he owned. Cassandra arrived as the sun was painting the western sky in shades of orange and gold. She rode up to the cabin and dismounted, looking around at the ranch with an assessing eye that he was learning meant she was taking in every detail. "You have built something good here," she said after a moment. "It has solid bones. Thank you, it is not much yet, but it has potential." "Potential is everything." She tied her horse near the water trough, and he noticed she had brought a saddlebag with her. When she saw him looking, she smiled. "I brought dessert. Apple pie. I may not be a fancy cook, but I can manage a decent pie." They went inside, and he served the stew while she cut generous slices of pie for after. They ate at the table, and the conversation flowed easier than he had expected. They talked about the land, about the challenges of making a living out here, about the satisfaction of building something with your own hands. Cassandra told him about her childhood, following her father across Texas, and learning to read the same skills he used to guide expeditions through unmapped territory. "He never treated me different for being a girl," she said, soaking up the last of her stew with a piece of bread. "Not in that way, at least. He taught me to shoot, to ride, to read weather and track game. I think he would have preferred a son, but he never made me feel like I was a disappointment. He just taught me everything he would have taught a boy." "That is a gift," Nathaniel said. "A lot of fathers would not have done that." It was. The problem came when I got older and he expected me to set aside everything he had taught me and become a proper lady. Get married, keep house, have children. He could not understand why I wanted to keep using the skills he had given me. It was like they were supposed to be temporary, something to amuse me until I grew up and did what women are supposed to do. What happened? We fought about it. Often. He wanted me to marry a man from San Antonio, a banker who had money and position. Nice enough fellow, but he made it clear he expected a wife who would be decorative and obedient. I said no. My father said I was being stubborn and foolish. I said I would rather be alone than owned. She looked down at her empty bowl, and he could see the grief that still lived in her. We had not spoken in 6 months when I got word he had been killed. I rode for 3 days to reach him, but by the time I arrived he was already buried. I never got to tell him I loved him, never got to say goodbye. Nathaniel reached across the table and covered her hand with his just for a moment. A brief connection, an acknowledgement of loss. "I am sorry. Thank you." She took a breath, visibly gathering herself. "His death left me with nothing except his rifle and his reputation." The banker came calling again, thinking I would be more reasonable now that I had no one to take care of me. I gave him his answer in the form of a black eye and a suggestion that he leave me alone. That was when I decided to come here, to build something that was mine. And here you are, fixing roofs and leasing land and making apple pie. That got a laugh from her, which had been his intention. "Here I am. What about you, Nate? How did you end up with this place?" He told her his story, which was less dramatic but no less genuine. The son of a blacksmith who had died young, leaving his mother to raise 3 children on her own. How he had started working at 12, doing whatever jobs he could find, learning that hard work and integrity would carry a man further than flashy promises. How he had saved and planned and finally bought this land with money earned dollar by dollar over years. "My mother passed 2 years ago," he said. "She got to see me buy this place, though, told me she was proud of me. My sister teaches school in Austin, and my brother runs a freight business in San Antonio. We are all doing all right, which would have pleased her. She raised you well. I can tell. She did her best with what she had, which is all any of us can do." They moved outside after dinner, sitting on the porch steps and watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The pie was excellent, sweet and tart and perfectly baked, and Nathaniel told her so sincerely. "My mother's recipe," Cassandra said. "One of the few domestic skills I learned from her. She said a woman who could bake a good pie would never starve because people would always trade for it. Practical advice, even if it came wrapped in traditional expectations. Wise and useful, that is a good combination." They were quiet for a while, the comfortable kind of silence that did not need filling. Nathaniel was acutely aware of her beside him, the subtle scent of lavender soap, the way the starlight caught in her hair. He had been attracted to women before, had even thought himself in love once when he was younger, but this felt different. This felt like the beginning of something that could matter if they were both brave enough to let it. "I should go," Cassandra said eventually. "Early start tomorrow." "I am working on the barn next. Be careful, that structure looked questionable. I will be cautious. Thank you for dinner, Nate, and for the conversation. I enjoyed both. So did I. We should do this again. She mounted her horse and looked down at him, and in the moonlight her smile was soft and genuine. Yes, we should. Over the following weeks they fell into a pattern. Cassandra would come to his place for dinner, or he would ride to hers and help with whatever project she was tackling. He was careful to let her direct the work, to ask rather than assume, to treat her as the capable person she was. In return, she began to relax around him, the guardedness fading to reveal a woman who was funny and curious and deeply passionate about the life she was building. They talked about everything. Books, though neither had much formal education. Politics, and they discovered they agreed on more than they disagreed. The future of the frontier and what it meant to be building lives in a place that was still being defined. She told him about her mother's people, who had been educators in Philadelphia before moving to Texas and being horrified by its rough edges. He told her about learning to work metal in his father's forge, the satisfaction of shaping raw material into something useful. What they did not talk about, not directly, was what they were becoming to each other. It hung between them, obvious but unspoken, a question neither was quite ready to ask. Nathaniel knew he was falling in love with her, had probably been falling since that first day in the street when she shot the rattlesnake, and refused to apologize for being competent. But he also knew that Cassandra needed to come to this in her own time, needed to trust that he meant what he said about wanting an equal. In mid-September, trouble arrived in the form of Marcus Webb. Webb was a rancher who owned a sizable spread northeast of town, a man in his late 40s with money and influence, and a sense of entitlement that came from rarely being told no. He had been away on business when Cassandra first arrived, and when he returned and heard about the independent woman living alone on the Harrison place, he decided she needed his protection whether she wanted it or not. Nathaniel was in town buying supplies when he heard about Webb's first visit to Cassandra's homestead. The story came from Billy Santos, a ranch hand who had been riding with Webb and had been disturbed enough by the encounter to mention it. He just showed up at her place, Billy said, uncomfortable but determined to tell someone. Started talking about how a woman alone was not safe, how he could offer her protection if she would be sensible about it. She thanked him politely and said she was managing fine, but he kept pushing Nate. Kept talking about how he could make her life easier, how she should consider what he was offering. She finally had to ask him to leave, and he did, but he was not happy about it. Nathaniel felt something cold settle in his chest. When was this? Yesterday afternoon. I just thought someone should know in case he tries again. Webb is not a bad man exactly, but he is used to getting what he wants, and he is not great at accepting rejection. Thanks for telling me, Billy, I appreciate it. Nathaniel rode out to Cassandra's place immediately, concern overriding his usual careful respect for her independence. He found her in the barn, which she had managed to shore up enough to be functional, mucking out old straw and humming to herself. She stopped when she saw him, and her expression suggested she knew why he was there. Let me guess. Someone told you about Marcus Webb. Billy Santos mentioned it. Are you all right? I am fine, Nate. Annoyed, but fine. He was condescending and pushy, but he left when I insisted. I do not think he is dangerous, just arrogant. Maybe. But arrogant men can become dangerous when their pride is hurt. I do not want to overstep, Cassandra, but I want you to be careful. If he comes back, if he causes any trouble, I am only 5 miles away. She set down her pitchfork and walked over to him, and there was something in her expression that made his breath catch. You are worried about me, yes. Not because you think I am helpless, because you care about what happens to me. Yes, he said again, knowing this was a pivot point, a moment where honesty mattered more than caution. I care about you, Cassandra, more than I probably should admit after such a short acquaintance. But there it is. She reached up and touched his face, just her fingertips against his jaw, and her eyes were very bright. I care about you too. That terrifies me if I am being honest. I have never wanted to need anyone. You do not need me, Nathaniel said softly. You are one of the most capable people I have ever met, but maybe if you wanted we could choose to be there for each other anyway. Not out of need, but because it is better than being alone. Is that a proposal, Nate Cole? Not yet. That is a statement of intention. When I propose, and I think we both know I am going to, I want you to be absolutely certain of what I am offering. A partnership, Cassandra, not ownership. Not a loss of yourself. A joining of equals who make each other stronger. She was crying, he realized, tears slipping down her cheeks even as she smiled. How are you real? Same way you are, just a person trying to do right by the life they have been given. He pulled her close and she came willingly, burying her face against his chest. He held her carefully, aware that this was new territory for both of them. I will not let Webb or anyone else hurt you, not if I can prevent it. I know, but Nate, I need to handle this myself. Do you understand? If you step in every time there is a problem, it proves everyone right who says I cannot manage alone. I need to prove to myself as much as anyone else that I can do this. It went against every instinct he had, but he understood what she was saying. Her independence was not just a preference, it was a core part of who she was. To undermine that, even with good intentions, would damage the very thing that made her Cassandra. All right. But promise me if it becomes more than you can handle, you will ask for help. Not because you are weak, but because that is what people who care about each other do. I promise. Webb returned 3 days later, and this time Nathaniel happened to be there, purely by coincidence. They were working on repairing the chicken coop, which had suffered from years of neglect, when the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Webb rode up with 2 of his men, and he looked distinctly displeased to see Nathaniel there. Mr. Cole. I did not realize you had an interest in the Harrison place. Miss Wells and I are neighbors. I am lending a hand with repairs. Nathaniel kept his tone neutral, giving nothing away. Webb turned to Cassandra, dismissing Nathaniel as if he had ceased to exist. Miss Wells, I wanted to follow up on our previous conversation. I have given considerable thought to your situation, and I have a proposal for you. Mr. Webb, as I explained before, I am not interested in whatever you are offering. I appreciate the concern, but it is misplaced. Hear me out. You have leased this property, which means you are paying money for something you do not own. I am prepared to offer you a position as housekeeper on my ranch. You would have room and board, a generous salary, and the protection of my household. It is a much more sensible arrangement for a woman in your circumstances. Cassandra's expression went very still, and Nathaniel recognized the look. It was the same one she had worn in the street when she explained to Tom Bradshaw that she would not be cajoled or bullied. Mr. Webb, I do not need protection, and I do not need charity. I am building a life here on my own terms, and I am doing just fine. I respectfully decline your offer. You are being stubborn. This homestead is barely habitable. You are living in conditions that are unsuitable for a woman of any quality. I am trying to help you. I did not ask for your help. Webb's face reddened. Miss Wells, I am a respected member of this community. My offer is generous, more generous than you deserve given your circumstances. You would be wise to accept it, and you would be wise to respect my decision. Cassandra took a step forward, and though she was significantly smaller than Webb, there was something in her bearing that made her seem larger. I will say this one final time. I am not interested in your offer, your protection, or your opinion of how I should live my life. I came to Redrock to be left alone to build something of my own. I am not looking for a husband, an employer, or a benefactor. I am looking to be treated as an adult capable of making my own choices. Now, unless you have legitimate business with me, I would like you to leave my property. Webb looked at her for a long moment, and Nathaniel saw the calculation in his eyes. The man was weighing his options, trying to decide if pushing harder would get him what he wanted or simply make things worse. Finally, he seemed to reach a conclusion. You will regret this. Winter is coming, Miss Wells. This place will not sustain you. When you are cold and hungry and realize your mistake, do not expect me to renew this offer. Duly noted. Goodbye, Mr. Webb. Webb and his men rode away, and Nathaniel watched them go with a sense of unease he could not quite shake. Cassandra stood very still until they were out of sight, and then she let out a long breath. That man is a problem. Yes, he is, but you handled him well. I handled him for now. Men like that do not give up easily. He thinks I am a puzzle to be solved, a challenge to his authority. She turned to Nathaniel, and there was worry in her eyes. Do you think he will cause real trouble? I think he bears watching. But you are not alone in this, Cassandra. Half the town saw you shoot that rattlesnake, and they know you are capable. Webb has influence, but he does not control everything, and I will be watching too. Without interfering, he promised. Unless you ask, or unless it is genuinely beyond what you can handle alone, I trust you to know the difference. She kissed him then, rising on her toes and pressing her lips to his with a warmth and intensity that spoke of gratitude and affection and the beginning of something deeper. It was their first kiss, and Nathaniel felt the impact of it all the way through his chest. When she pulled back, they were both slightly breathless. Thank you, she said simply, for understanding what I need. Always, he replied, and meant it absolutely. The rest of September passed without incident. Cassandra continued working on her homestead, and Nathaniel continued building his herd. They saw each other several times a week, and the relationship between them deepened and solidified into something that felt like bedrock, unshakable and true. Nathaniel found himself thinking about the future, about what it would mean to build a life with someone rather than just beside someone. He had always imagined marriage as partnership in theory, but with Cassandra, it became tangible, real. She challenged him, made him think harder about his assumptions, called him out when he slipped into old patterns of thinking. And he did the same for her, providing a sounding board for her ideas, offering perspective when she was too close to a problem to see it clearly. By early October, when the heat of summer had given way to the more bearable warmth of autumn, Nathaniel knew with absolute certainty that he wanted to marry her. But he also knew that proposing to Cassandra Wells required more than just words and a ring. It required a vision of what their life together could be, a concrete demonstration that he understood what she needed and respected who she was. He spent 2 weeks planning, working out details, making sure everything was in place. When he finally rode to her homestead on a Saturday afternoon in mid-October, he carried with him more than just hope. He found her sitting on her porch, cleaning her rifle with the methodical attention of someone who had been taught to care for her tools. She looked up when he approached, and her smile was instant and genuine. "Nate, I was not expecting you until this evening. I know, I wanted to talk to you about something, and I figured afternoon light was better than evening shadows for an important conversation." She set the rifle aside and stood, brushing off her hands. "That sounds serious." "It is. Can we sit?" They settled on the porch steps, close enough that their shoulders touched, and Nathaniel took a moment to organize his thoughts. This mattered too much to botch with poor word choices. "I love you, Cassandra," he began, and watched her eyes widen slightly. "I am in love with you, and I have been for weeks now. I want to marry you, to build a life with you, to be your partner in every sense of that word. But before I formally ask, I need to tell you what I am actually proposing because I think the details matter." She was listening with complete focus, her blue eyes never leaving his face. "I am not asking you to give up your homestead or to move onto my ranch as a wife who exists to support her husband's dreams. I am proposing that we combine our properties into one larger ranch. 40 acres plus 200 acres gives us 240 acres, enough to support a bigger herd and more diversified farming. We would work it together as equal partners, both our names on the deed, both of us making decisions about what we grow and how we manage it." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket and handed it to her. "I had a lawyer in town draw this up. It is a partnership agreement. If you marry me, this property arrangement goes into effect." Everything is split evenly, and if something happens to me, it all goes to you, not to some distant relative or back to the state. And vice versa. It protects you, Cassandra. It makes sure that being my wife does not cost you your independence." She unfolded the paper with hands that shook slightly, reading through the legal language with the careful attention of someone who understood the weight of contracts. "You really did this," she said softly. "I did. Because I meant what I said. I want an equal, not a prize. I want to wake up every morning knowing I am building something with you, not for you or in spite of you. I want to argue with you about which fields to plant and laugh with you when the chickens escape again, and kiss you when the day is done and we are both tired and covered in dust. I want a real partnership, Cassandra, the kind that is messy and challenging and absolutely worth it." She was crying again, but she was also laughing, and when she looked at him there was so much love in her eyes that he felt humbled by it. "Yes," she said, clear and certain. "Yes, Nate. I will marry you. I will be your partner and your equal and the person who tells you when you are being stubborn about cattle management." He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, and when they finally broke apart they were both grinning like fools. "I do not have a ring," he admitted. "I thought maybe you would want to pick one out, or maybe you do not even want a ring. I was not sure." "I want a ring," she said decisively. "Nothing fancy, but something that says I am yours and you are mine, a circle with no beginning and no end. That feels right." They rode into town together that afternoon and visited the small jewelry shop run by Mr. Feldman, a jeweler who had moved to Texas from New York and brought his skills with him. Cassandra chose a simple gold band with a small sapphire set flush with the metal, practical enough for ranch work but beautiful enough to mean something. Nathaniel bought a matching gold band for himself because if he was asking her to wear a symbol of their commitment, he would wear one too. News of their engagement spread through Redrock faster than wildfire. Most people were happy for them, could see that they fit together in a way that made sense. A few raised eyebrows at the partnership agreement, but Nathaniel had expected that. He was asking people to accept something different, and different took time. Pastor Reynolds agreed to marry them in early November, giving them a few weeks to prepare. Cassandra insisted on a small ceremony, just close friends and necessary witnesses. She did not want a spectacle, just a legal and spiritual recognition of the commitment they were making to each other. Marcus Webb, however, was not content to let things rest. 3 days after the engagement was announced, he showed up at Nathaniel's ranch looking like a man with a grievance. "Cole, I want to talk to you." Nathaniel had been working on a new fence line and he set down his tools carefully before turning to face Webb. "What can I do for you? You can explain what you think you are doing with Cassandra Wells. I am marrying her. That seems straightforward enough." "That woman is not fit to be anyone's wife. She is stubborn, disrespectful, and completely inappropriate. You are making a mistake." Nathaniel felt his temper stir but kept it leashed. "That is not your concern. I am making it my concern. I offered her an honorable position and she threw it in my face. Now she is marrying you and I suspect it is because she has no other options. You are being used, Cole. She is taking advantage of your good nature. Mr. Webb, I am going to say this once and I am going to say it clearly. Cassandra and I are in love and we are building a life together as equals. What we do with our land, our ranch, and our future is our business. Not yours, not the town's, ours. If you cannot respect that, then I suggest you keep your distance from both of us." Webb's face darkened. "You will regret this. That woman will ruin you. She does not know her place and she never will. You are a fool." "Maybe I am, but I am a fool in love with the smartest, bravest, most capable woman I have ever met. I will take those odds any day." Webb left without another word, and Nathaniel watched him go with a sense of foreboding. He rode to Cassandra's place that evening and told her about the encounter. She listened with a grim expression. "He is not going to let this go, is he? I do not think so." "But Cassandra, we have the law on our side. We have a community that largely supports us. He can be angry all he wants, but he cannot actually stop us from getting married or running our ranch the way we see fit. You are right. I just hate that our happiness is causing this kind of trouble." "It is not our happiness causing trouble, it is his entitlement. Big difference." She leaned against him and he wrapped his arms around her, offering comfort and solidarity. "We are going to be fine," he said firmly. "We are going to get married, combine our ranches, and build something amazing. And people like Webb can accept it or not, but it will not change what we have." "I love you," she said quietly. "I did not think I would ever say that to anyone and mean it the way I mean it with you, but I do. I love you, Nate. I love you too, more than I knew I could love anyone." The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of planning and preparation. Cassandra sewed a simple but elegant dress in cream-colored cotton, practical enough for her future life but special enough to mark the occasion. Nathaniel bought a new suit and felt ridiculous and proud in equal measure. They worked on moving Cassandra's essential belongings to his ranch, which would become their ranch once the papers were signed. They talked late into the night about their plans, about wanting children someday but not right away, about building a legacy that would last beyond their lifetimes. Sarah Chen offered to make the wedding cake, a gesture of friendship that moved Cassandra to tears. Mrs. Patterson coordinated the women of the church to provide food for the small reception. Billy Santos and a few of the other ranch hands offered to help with any heavy lifting or setup. The community, or at least the parts of it that mattered, was embracing them. 2 days before the wedding, Marcus Webb made one final attempt to interfere. He rode to the church while Pastor Reynolds was inside preparing for Sunday services and demanded to speak with him about the unsuitability of marrying Nathaniel and Cassandra. Pastor Reynolds, a gentle man who nonetheless had a backbone of steel when it came to matters of conscience, listened politely and then delivered a response that became legendary in Redrock. "Mr. Webb, I appreciate your concern. However, I have spent considerable time with both Nathaniel and Cassandra, and I have never seen two people more clearly suited to each other or more committed to building a godly marriage. They love each other, respect each other, and are entering into this union with open eyes and pure hearts. Unless you have legal grounds to object, which I suspect you do not, then I will be performing this wedding as scheduled. Furthermore, I would suggest that your energy might be better spent examining why their happiness troubles you so much. Envy is a corrosive sin, Mr. Webb. I hope you will consider that." Webb left in a fury, and Pastor Reynolds quietly told Nathaniel about the encounter the next day. Nathaniel felt a fierce gratitude for the preacher's support and said so. "You and Cassandra are good people," Pastor Reynolds said simply. "You are trying to build something honest and true in a world that often settles for less. That deserves support, not opposition." The wedding took place on a bright November morning, the air cool and crisp and smelling of wood smoke from a dozen chimneys. Cassandra walked to the church alone, a choice she had made deliberately, refusing the traditional notion that she needed to be given away by a man as if she were property changing hands. She walked to Nathaniel of her own free will, choosing him just as he was choosing her. She was beautiful in her cream dress, her hair loose and flowing, a crown of autumn wildflowers woven into the auburn waves. Nathaniel stood at the front of the church in his new suit, his heart pounding so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. When their eyes met, when she smiled at him with absolute certainty and joy, he felt like the luckiest man who had ever lived. The ceremony was simple but profound. They spoke their vows clearly, promising to love and honor each other, to be faithful partners, to support each other's dreams and challenge each other's failings. When Pastor Reynolds pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was witnessed by 40 people and felt like a promise kept to both of them. The reception was joyful and rowdy in the best possible way. People danced, ate too much cake, and toasted the couple with genuine affection. Sarah Chen caught Cassandra in a tight hug and whispered something that made the bride laugh through happy tears. Billy Santos shook Nathaniel's hand and told him he was setting a good example for the rest of them. Even gruff old Mayor Hutchins came by to offer his congratulations, and admit that he had been wrong to doubt Cassandra's ability to make a life in Redrock. Webb did not attend, and his absence was noted but not mourned. There were more important things to focus on than the disapproval of one bitter man. When the celebration wound down in the early evening, Nathaniel and Cassandra rode together to what was now their ranch. 2 properties joined into one. They had decided to live in Nathaniel's cabin for now, as it was in better condition, and use Cassandra's original homestead as storage and possibly housing for hired help once they could afford it. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a discovery of each other that felt like the natural progression of everything that had come before. They lay together afterward, tangled in sheets and each other, talking quietly about the future. "I never thought I could have this," Cassandra admitted, her head resting on his chest. "Love without losing myself, partnership without ownership. I thought those things were impossible in a world designed to give men all the power. They should not be impossible. The fact that they usually are just means we are not thinking creatively enough about what relationships can be." He ran his fingers through her hair, marveling at the softness of it. "I want to prove that this works, Cassandra, not just for us, but as an example. To show that marriages can be real partnerships, that women can be equals without the world falling apart. That is a lot of pressure to put on one marriage, true. So how about we just focus on being happy and building a good life, and let other people draw their own conclusions from watching us? That sounds much more manageable." She kissed his jaw, his cheek, his mouth. "I love you, husband. I love you, wife and partner and best friend." They slept deeply that night, wrapped around each other, and woke to the first day of their married life filled with equal parts excitement and determination. The winter that followed was cold but not brutal. They worked together to prepare the ranch for the worst weather, stockpiling supplies, ensuring the livestock had adequate shelter, cutting firewood that they stacked in neat rows near the cabin. Cassandra proved to be every bit as capable as Nathaniel had known she was, strong and tireless, never complaining about the hard work. And Nathaniel proved his commitment to equality in 100 small ways, asking her opinion, deferring to her expertise when she knew more than he did, sharing the domestic work as well as the ranch work. They had their disagreements, of course. Cassandra wanted to expand the chicken operation faster than Nathaniel thought wise. Nathaniel wanted to invest in a new bull, while Cassandra thought their current one was adequate for another year. But they learned to argue productively, to listen to each other's reasoning, to compromise when possible and defer to whoever felt more strongly when compromise was not an option. It was not always easy, but it was always worth it. In late December, they invited Sarah Chen and her family for dinner, along with Billy Santos and a few other friends. It was a way of giving thanks for the support they had received and strengthening the bonds of community that made life on the frontier bearable. The cabin was crowded and warm, filled with laughter and good food, and when everyone had left and they were cleaning up together, Cassandra turned to Nathaniel with a look of deep contentment. "This is what I wanted. This exactly. A life that we built together, filled with people we care about, centered on work that matters. Me too. And we are just getting started." January brought hard cold and snow, and they spent more time inside, using the opportunity to plan for spring. They pored over seed catalogs and livestock journals, debating the merits of different crops and breeds. Cassandra taught Nathaniel to read better, as his education had been spotty at best, and he improved rapidly under her patient instruction. He taught her more advanced carpentry, and together they built a bookshelf for the small collection of volumes they were slowly accumulating. In February, Marcus Webb's ranch was hit by cattle rustlers. It was a bold operation, and nearly 40 head of cattle were stolen in the night. The sheriff organized a posse, and Nathaniel joined it, not out of any fondness for Webb, but because rustlers were a threat to every rancher in the territory. They tracked the thieves for 3 days, finally catching up with them at the border and recovering most of the stolen cattle. Webb's losses were significant but not catastrophic. When Nathaniel returned home, exhausted and saddle-sore, Cassandra had hot food and a warm bath waiting. She tended to him with the kind of care that had nothing to do with subservience and everything to do with love. "I am glad you are home safe," she said, washing trail dust from his back. "3 days felt like 3 weeks. I missed you too, although I have to say, sleeping on the ground makes me appreciate our bed about 1,000 times more." She laughed, and they spent the evening close together, grateful for the simple fact of being in the same place. March arrived with the promise of spring, and they threw themselves into planting season. They had decided on a mix of crops, some for their own use and some to sell, along with expanding the cattle operation modestly. It was ambitious but achievable, and they worked from dawn to dusk making it happen. It was during this time that Cassandra realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but wanted to be certain before she said anything. When she finally told Nathaniel one evening in late March, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. A baby, truly, truly. "Probably due in late October or early November if my calculations are right." He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing, and when he set her down he was grinning so wide it looked like his face might split. "This is incredible. Terrifying, but incredible." Those two things together describe most of parenthood, from what I understand. We are going to be parents. We are going to have a family, Cassandra. We already are a family, just the two of us. But yes, we are going to expand it. They told close friends over the next few weeks, and the response was universally positive. Mrs. Patterson immediately began organizing the women to sew baby clothes. Sarah Chen offered advice based on her own experience with 3 children. Even Mayor Hutchins stopped by to offer congratulations and to mention, somewhat sheepishly, that he had been wrong about Cassandra from the start and was man enough to admit it. As Cassandra's pregnancy progressed, Nathaniel adjusted their workload to make sure she was not overexerting herself. It was a delicate balance, respecting her capability while also being sensible about the demands of pregnancy. They argued about it more than once, but always came to reasonable compromises that left them both feeling heard. Summer arrived hot and long, and Cassandra spent more time in the shade, doing tasks that did not require heavy lifting. She sewed baby clothes, helped with the accounts and planning, and maintained the kitchen garden that provided much of their fresh vegetables. Nathaniel took on more of the heavier work, hiring Billy Santos part-time to help with tasks that really required 2 people. In August, Marcus Webb died. It was sudden, a heart failure that took him in his sleep. Nathaniel felt a complicated mix of emotions about it. Webb had been an obstacle and a source of tension, but he had also been a human being who deserved basic compassion. They attended the funeral, paying respects more to the idea of community than to the man himself. Webb's death did resolve one lingering issue, though. His ranch was inherited by a nephew from St. Louis who had no interest in Texas or cattle. The nephew sold the property within a month, and the new owner, a family named Morrison with 2 teenage sons and a daughter, turned out to be friendly and progressive. Mrs. Morrison and Cassandra became friends almost immediately, bonding over their shared determination to be more than decorative additions to frontier life. September was cooler, a relief after the brutal summer heat. Cassandra was very pregnant now, moving with the careful balance of someone carrying precious cargo. They had prepared the cabin as best they could, setting up a cradle that Nathaniel had built himself, gathering supplies recommended by Mrs. Patterson and the midwife who would attend the birth. Cassandra went into labor on a cool evening in late October, almost exactly a year after they had married. Nathaniel sent Billy to fetch the midwife and then settled in to be as supportive as he knew how to be. Labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when his fear threatened to overwhelm him. But Cassandra was strong and determined, and the midwife was skilled and calm. Their son was born just after dawn, squalling and red-faced and absolutely perfect. Nathaniel cut the cord with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face while Cassandra held their baby with exhausted joy. "A boy," the midwife announced unnecessarily. "Good size, healthy lungs. You did well, Mrs. Cole." "We did well," Cassandra corrected gently, looking at Nathaniel with so much love it made his chest ache. "All three of us." They named him Thomas after Cassandra's father, with the middle name James after Nathaniel's father. Thomas James Cole, the first child of a partnership that was already proving that marriage could be something different, something better. The first year of Thomas's life was exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. They took turns with night feedings, shared the responsibilities of childcare alongside their ranch work, figured out how to balance all the competing demands on their time and energy. It was harder than either had imagined, but they navigated it together, supporting each other through the difficult moments and celebrating the milestones together. When Thomas was 6 months old and starting to eat solid food, they hired a young woman named Elena Rodriguez to help around the house a few days a week. Elena was 17, the oldest of 6 children, and she had experience with babies and a desperate need for employment to help support her family. Cassandra taught her to read and write in exchange for the help, and Elena became part of their extended family, a relationship built on mutual respect and fair compensation. Life settled into a rhythm. The ranch prospered modestly but steadily. Their crops did well enough to sell surplus at market. The cattle herd grew. They added pigs and expanded the chicken operation, and Cassandra's prediction about the profitability of eggs proved absolutely correct. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable, building security year by year. When Thomas was 2, Cassandra became pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect. Their daughter, Anne-Marie, was born in the spring of 1882. A small, fierce creature with her mother's auburn hair and her father's gray eyes. Thomas was fascinated by his sister, and Nathaniel and Cassandra settled into the controlled chaos of raising 2 young children while running a ranch. They expanded the cabin, adding 2 bedrooms and a larger living area. Nathaniel did most of the construction himself, with help from Billy and the Morrison boys. It was satisfying work, literally building the space that would hold their growing family. In the spring of 1883, Pastor Reynolds asked Nathaniel to speak at the church about building a successful marriage. Nathaniel was reluctant, uncomfortable with public speaking, but Cassandra encouraged him to do it. She thought their example might help other couples, might give other women hope that they could have partnerships rather than subordination. Nathaniel kept his remarks simple and honest. He talked about respect, about truly listening to your spouse, about making decisions together. He talked about the partnership agreement they had signed, about making sure that marriage did not mean loss of identity for either person. He talked about the practical realities of sharing work and childcare. And he talked about love, about choosing each other every day, about building something together that neither could build alone. The response was mixed. Some people were inspired, saw possibility in what he described. Others were uncomfortable, felt like he was criticizing traditional marriages. But several young couples approached them afterward, asking questions, wanting to know more. And one young woman, not yet married, thanked Cassandra with tears in her eyes for proving that she did not have to choose between love and independence. "You have given me hope," the girl said. "I was starting to think I would have to be alone forever because I could not bear to give up who I am. But maybe I do not have to. Maybe I can find someone like Mr. Cole, someone who actually wants an equal." "You can," Cassandra said firmly. "Do not settle. Wait for someone who sees your strength as an asset, not a threat. They are out there." As their children grew, Nathaniel and Cassandra made sure to raise them with the same values they had built their marriage on. They taught Thomas that women were not lesser than men, that his mother was as smart and capable as his father. They taught Anne-Marie that she could do anything her brother could do, that her gender did not limit her possibilities. It was counter to much of what frontier society taught, but they were determined to raise children who would build on what they had started. In 1885, when Thomas was 7 and Anne-Marie was 3, Cassandra became pregnant for a third time. This pregnancy was unplanned, a surprise that came with mixed emotions. They loved their children but had felt complete as a family of 4. Still, they welcomed this new life, prepared to expand their family once more. Their second son, Samuel Robert, was born in early 1886. He was an easy baby, cheerful and adaptable, and slotted into their family with minimal disruption. Thomas took his role as oldest brother seriously, helping with the younger children in ways that made both parents proud. Anne-Marie, now 4, was less interested in the baby and more interested in following her father around the ranch, learning everything she could about animals and land management. The years passed, marked by the slow, steady progress of a life well lived. They added to their land, purchasing an additional 80 acres when it became available. They built a proper barn, hired help during busy seasons, became respected members of the community. Their marriage remained strong, built on the foundation of mutual respect and genuine partnership. They still argued sometimes, still had to negotiate competing priorities, but they did it as equals who loved each other. In 1890, when Thomas was 12, Anne-Marie was 8, and Samuel was 4, they faced their greatest challenge. A drought struck the region, lasting through spring and into summer. Water became scarce, crops struggled, and many ranchers lost significant portions of their herds. Nathaniel and Cassandra made hard decisions, culling their herd earlier than they wanted to, rationing water carefully, working from before dawn until after dark to save what they could. It was Cassandra who came up with the idea that ultimately saved them. She remembered something her father had taught her about finding underground water sources, about reading the land for signs of springs and aquifers. She spent days surveying their property, looking for the subtle indicators of water below the surface. Finally, in a corner of their land that had always been marshy even in dry years, she found what she was looking for. They hired a man with drilling equipment, a significant expense, and sunk a new well. It took 3 attempts, but they finally hit a strong, reliable water source at 80 feet. That well not only saved their ranch, but also became a lifeline for several neighboring properties, who they allowed to haul water for their own herds in exchange for labor or goods. It cemented their position in the community as people who looked out for their neighbors, who understood that they were all in this together. The drought finally broke in late summer with storms that turned the parched earth green again almost overnight. They had survived, battered but intact, and their marriage had been tested and proven strong under pressure. As the children grew into adolescence, Nathaniel and Cassandra watched with pride as the values they had instilled took root. Thomas was respectful of girls and women, treated them as equals without even thinking about it because that was what he had learned at home. Anne-Marie was confident and capable, certain of her own worth, and unwilling to accept less than she deserved. Samuel was still young, but he was following the example set by his older siblings. In 1895, when they had been married 17 years, Nathaniel and Cassandra sat on their porch one evening after the children had gone to bed. The ranch stretched out before them in the gathering darkness, everything they had built together tangible and real. "Do you remember what you told me that day at the church social?" Cassandra asked, her hand in his. "That you wanted an equal, not a prize?" "I remember. I meant it then and I mean it now. You have given me something I never thought I could have, a partnership that respects who I am, love without ownership, a family built on equality and respect. You kept your promise, Nate. Every single day for 17 years you have treated me as your equal." "It was not hard, Cassandra. You are extraordinary. Treating you as anything less than equal would have been not only wrong but also foolish. I have become a better man because of you, because you challenge me and support me and love me enough to call me out when I am wrong." We have built something good here, have we not? Not just the ranch, but the life, the family, the example we are setting, we have. And I am proud of it. Proud of you, proud of our children, proud of the fact that we proved it could be done differently." She leaned her head on his shoulder and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one. They had faced challenges and triumphs, hardship and joy, and they had done it together as true partners. Their love had not diminished over time but had deepened, becoming something richer and more complex than the initial spark of attraction. As the years continued to pass, their children grew into adults who carried forward the values they had learned. Thomas married a woman who was his intellectual equal, a teacher who shared his progressive views. They built their own partnership marriage, citing Nathaniel and Cassandra as their model. Anne-Marie, true to her independent spirit, chose to go to college, one of the first women from Redrock to do so. She studied agriculture and then returned to help manage the family ranch, bringing new ideas and techniques that increased productivity significantly. Samuel followed his own path, becoming a veterinarian and using his skills to help ranchers throughout the region. By the time Nathaniel and Cassandra reached their late 50s, they could look at their life together with deep satisfaction. Their ranch was prosperous and stable. Their children were thriving, building lives that honored the lessons they had been taught. And their marriage, that partnership they had forged in 1879 against the expectations of their time, remained strong and vital. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1909, their children threw them a celebration. The party was held at the ranch, with friends and family gathered from throughout the region. People gave speeches about the impact Nathaniel and Cassandra had made, about how their example had changed minds and inspired others. It was humbling and gratifying in equal measure. When it was Nathaniel's turn to speak, he kept it brief. 30 years ago, I met a woman who refused to be owned by any man. I told her that was good because I wanted an equal, not a prize. That decision, to build a partnership instead of a traditional marriage, was the best choice I ever made. Cassandra, you have been my partner, my equal, my best friend, and my love for 3 decades. You have made me better than I ever could have been alone. Thank you for choosing me then and every day since. Cassandra stood and kissed him to applause and cheers, and when she spoke her voice was clear and certain. Thank you for seeing me as I am and loving me not in spite of my independence but because of it. Thank you for proving that marriage can be partnership, that love can coexist with equality. Thank you for building this life with me. I love you, Nathaniel Cole, today and always. They danced that evening, just as they had at the church social 31 years before. They were older now, grayer and more lined, but the connection between them was as strong as ever. Around them, their children danced with their own partners and their grandchildren ran between the adults, full of energy and joy. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Nathaniel and Cassandra stood together on their porch, watching the activity. Cassandra leaned against him and he wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "We did it," she said softly. "We built something that lasts. We did, and it is still going strong." They stood there until the last guest had left, and their children had gathered up the grandchildren and headed home. Then they went inside their house, this place they had built together through work and love and stubborn determination to do things differently. In bed that night, they lay facing each other, hands clasped between them. "I would choose you again," Cassandra whispered. "In every lifetime, in every circumstance, I would choose you, and I would choose you. Always and forever, my equal, my partner, my love." They fell asleep like that, together as they had been for 30 years, as they would be for all the years to come. Their story was not about a woman who needed to be saved or a man who needed to be completed. It was about 2 people who chose to build something together, who proved that love and equality could coexist, who showed that marriage could be partnership in the truest sense of the word. Outside, the Texas night was vast and star-filled, stretching over the land they had worked and the life they had built. The ranch would continue beyond them, passed down to children who understood that progress came not from maintaining tradition blindly but from questioning it, improving it, building on it. And at the heart of it all was a simple truth that Nathaniel and Cassandra had lived every day of their marriage. True love does not diminish either person. True love does not require ownership or subordination. True love is partnership, equality, respect, and choice. It is two people standing together, not because they must, but because they want to. It is building something together that neither could build alone and being better together than apart. That was what they had. That was what they built, and it was more than enough. It was everything. The years continued to bless them with health and purpose. In their 60s, Nathaniel and Cassandra scaled back their direct involvement in ranch work, though neither ever truly retired. They remained active in the community, mentoring young couples, advocating for women's education and property rights, supporting progressive causes that aligned with their values. They watched as the frontier slowly transformed into something more settled, more civilized, and they were proud to have been part of that transformation. When Cassandra was 67, she published a small book about her life, about building a partnership marriage on the frontier. It was not a bestseller, but it found its audience, women who were hungry for proof that they did not have to choose between love and independence. She received letters from all over the country, women thanking her for showing them a different path. Each letter was a reminder that their lives had mattered, that their choices had created ripples far beyond Redrock, Texas. Nathaniel's health began to decline in his early 70s. Nothing dramatic, but the slow wearing down that comes with age and a lifetime of hard physical work. Cassandra cared for him with the same fierce devotion she had shown in everything she did, and he accepted her help with the grace of a man who had never equated needing assistance with weakness. They spent their final years together in the cabin they had expanded and improved over decades, surrounded by children and grandchildren and even a few great-grandchildren. They told stories about the old days, about cattle drives and droughts, about building a ranch from almost nothing. But most of all, they told stories about choosing each other, about building a partnership that had lasted through everything life threw at them. Nathaniel passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, with Cassandra holding his hand. His last words to her were simple and true. "Best decision I ever made was loving you." Cassandra lived another 5 years after Nathaniel's death, remaining sharp and engaged until the very end. She never remarried, told anyone who asked that she had already had the great love of her life and was content with the memories. She spent those years organizing their papers and records, ensuring that the story of their partnership would be preserved for future generations. When she died at 81, surrounded by family, her last thoughts were of Nathaniel, of the life they had built, of the promise they had made and kept to each other. She died knowing that they had proven something important, that they had shown that marriage could be different, better, more equal. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking their ranch, under headstones that bore simple inscriptions. His read, Nathaniel James Cole, beloved husband, father, and partner. Hers read, Cassandra Wells Cole, who would not be owned and found a man who wanted an equal. The ranch continued under the management of Anne Marie and her family, who ran it according to the principles their parents had established. The partnership model that Nathaniel and Cassandra had pioneered became more common as years passed, as women gained more legal rights and social acceptance for their autonomy. Their story became part of the local history, told and retold as an example of what was possible when two people committed to building something together as equals. Years later, historians researching the role of women on the frontier would find Cassandra's book and the extensive journals both she and Nathaniel had kept. Those documents provided invaluable insight into what life was really like for couples who challenged traditional gender roles, who built partnerships instead of hierarchies. Academic papers were written, Cassandra's book was reprinted, and their story reached audiences they never could have imagined. But the real legacy was simpler and more profound. It was in the marriages of their descendants, built on foundations of equality and respect. It was in the young women who read about Cassandra and realized they did not have to choose between love and independence. It was in the young men who learned from Nathaniel's example that treating women as equals did not diminish them, but made everyone's life richer. The story of Cassandra Wells and Nathaniel Cole became more than just a romance. It became proof that love does not require ownership, that partnership is possible between people who respect each other as equals, that the strength of a relationship comes not from dominance and submission, but from mutual support and shared purpose. They had built a life together on the Texas frontier in a time when women were expected to be subordinate and men were expected to dominate. They had defied those expectations not through grand gestures but through daily choices, through treating each other with respect and love and equality. And in doing so, they had created something that lasted far beyond their own lifetimes. Their story was about a woman who said she would not be owned by any man alive, and a cowboy who said that was good because he wanted an equal, not a prize. It was about two people who meant what they said and built a life that proved it. And it was about love, the kind that makes both people stronger, that celebrates rather than diminishes, that chooses partnership over possession. That was their legacy. That was their gift to the future. And it was a gift that continued to inspire long after they were gone, proving that love built on equality is not just possible but powerful, not just romantic but revolutionary. The ranch still stands, now run by the fourth generation of their family. The original cabin has been preserved as a historical site, and people come from all over to see where Nathaniel and Cassandra built their partnership marriage. There is a small museum with their belongings, their journals, photographs of their family. And on the wall, in a place of honor, hangs a framed copy of the partnership agreement Nathaniel had drawn up before proposing, the legal document that ensured Cassandra would never lose her independence by becoming his wife. Visitors read that document and are often moved to tears by what it represents. In an era when women had few rights and marriage often meant legal subordination, here was proof that some people chose differently. Here was evidence that love and equality could coexist, that marriage could be partnership in the fullest sense. The story ends not with their deaths, but with the continuation of what they started. Every couple who builds a marriage based on mutual respect and equality is part of their legacy. Every woman who refuses to be diminished by love is honoring what Cassandra fought for. Every man who seeks an equal partner rather than someone to dominate is following Nathaniel's example. They lived, they loved, they built something beautiful together. They proved that partnership was possible, that women did not have to choose between independence and love, that men could be stronger by supporting rather than suppressing their wives. They showed that the best marriages are not about one person winning and the other losing, but about both people winning together. And in the end, that is the best kind of love story. Not one about rescue or possession or one person completing another, but about two whole people choosing to build something together that makes both of their lives richer and more meaningful. Cassandra Wells refused to be owned by any man alive. Nathaniel Cole wanted an equal, not a prize. They found each other, built a partnership that lasted a lifetime, and proved that love built on respect and equality is the strongest foundation of all. Their story began in the dust and heat of a Texas street in 1878, and ended with their peaceful deaths surrounded by family decades later. But the impact of their choices, the example of their partnership, continues to echo forward through time. They lived well, loved deeply, and left the world better than they found it. That is a happy ending. That is a life well lived. That is what happens when two people commit to being equals, partners, and lovers all at once. That is the legacy of Cassandra and Nathaniel Cole, and it will endure as long as there are people who believe that love should elevate rather than diminish, who understand that the best relationships are built on foundations of mutual respect, who know that saying, "I want an equal, not a prize," is the most romantic declaration of all.